Starlink low Earth orbit satellite internet has long been watched by a lot of RVers as the silver bullet, a way to get fast, reliable internet anywhere. And now that Starlink has launched the Starlink for RVs plan with no wait, people have been fervently ordering the service in order to be able to boondock in the middle of nowhere while keeping contact with the rest of the world. We've had Starlink for about 4 months now and have talked with plenty of other subscribers to the service. And on this video, I'm going to share with you some reasons why you might want to wait on your order. Starlink is far from being the perfect solution for everyone, and problems abound. But first, I need to give you some background. Starlink offers 3 services: residential, business, and RV. Business is $500 a month and not really important to RVers, except that you might start seeing some remote campgrounds operating off of it, which is great. The residential plan is the primary service Starlink offers. It's for people who live in rural areas with little access to the internet. It's going to change the world on that front, truly. But just like cell towers, Starlink is limited by the number of users. So from the beginning, they've only allowed a certain number of owners of the residential plan in given areas, a hexagonal cell. As more satellites come online, they allow more people to order within that cell. Now, there are over 2,000 Starlink satellites in orbit right now, and Starlink plans to eventually have more than 40,000 satellites up there. But they're only able to send up about 250 a month right now, and they take several months to come online. So the network grows slowly. And because of that, a large number of people wanting Starlink residential service are on a wait list. But that hasn't really stopped RV owners from purchasing Starlink. Up until the RV service was launched, many had been just buying it from a random available service address and having it shipped somewhere else. They would then change the service address every time they moved, as long as they could find an open cell. Eventually, Starlink tested roaming and people were able to move around without changing their address. And then portability was instituted. Portability was roaming for a price. Residential service for portability is what we have. The residential service is $110 a month, and for an additional $25, you can move your dish around without having to change your service address and without having to worry if a given cell has availability. The catch is, when you aren't at your service address, the data is deprioritized. That means that your access to the internet comes after those who have residential or business service, causing your speeds to be slower during times when the network is busy, usually in the evenings. So, when portability was announced, a lot of RVers took note and purchased Starlink. Makes sense. It was going to be less of a challenge to use. A few weeks later, Starlink announced the RV plan, which made purchasing even easier. People could get it wherever they were. The RV plan costs the same as residential with portability, $135. The difference is that anyone can get it with no wait and that it's always deprioritized. It's also pausable, meaning you can just pay for a month at a time. On the residential side, if you stop your service, you may lose your place. Now, for a while, the deprioritization wasn't an issue to virtually anyone. But as more and more of these RV plans have been sold, both to RVers and to people who wanted it for their home but didn't want to wait, Starlink began to make some changes. And that leads me to my first reason why Starlink might not be ideal as the sole internet option for an RVer yet. Lately, we've seen speeds as low as 0 to 3 megabits per second in the evenings, and we've talked to many who've seen the same. That's virtually unusable. It seems to be relegated mainly to people in busier areas in the eastern half of the country. After all, 80% of people live in the east, and that's probably the mistake Starlink missed. They didn't realize that people in the RV plans would be heavily relegated to the eastern half of the country. Starlink has had to throttle people way down in order to keep the network from getting bogged down for those residential users whose plan is not supposed to have slow speeds. I believe the network is being massively oversold right now. Perhaps Starlink just needs a big influx of cash, but this plan for RVers is being heavily purchased at the moment. The terms of service allow them to slow down people who are on the RV plan or who are using portability on the residential plan. So there's still a big wait list to buy the residential service in much of the country because they can't provide enough bandwidth. But people on deprioritized plans are flooding the network, and Starlink doesn't seem to care, since they're still heavily selling the RV plan, even partnering with companies in the RV space to advertise it, all at the same price as residential, with often a greatly reduced service. Now, many people have not experienced this yet. Many are getting excellent speeds, and most of them are in the West or in any area where there's availability in the network. But I have major concerns for the winter when RVers begin to congregate in warm places like Florida and Arizona. A couple months ago, you wouldn't see more than a dish or two in a campground. I counted 10 at our last campground. Imagine how many people will be trying to use Starlink in Quartzsite, Arizona this winter. But speed issues aren't the only problem. We all know about the horrible reviews of customer service for companies like Verizon and AT&T. Well, Starlink's is worse, at least if you can get a response at all. There isn't even an obvious way to contact customer support. You have to go into the frequently asked questions and click on the thumbs down where it says, "Did this answer your question?" to be able to submit a support ticket. And we've heard from many people that it's taking weeks to get a response. And people do have problems that need tech support. For the most part, the system works pretty flawlessly, but I've heard lots of stories about kits that are damaged upon arrival with a several-week wait for a response to get it replaced. Or if you break one of the components yourself, you can't simply order a new dish or a new router from the website. You have to submit a ticket and wait for a response. More on Starlink in a moment, but first I'd like to thank the sponsor of this video, RVmattress.com by Brooklyn Bedding. Abby and I have been testing out their Wanderlust mattress for over 4 months now, and we couldn't be happier. We're sleeping better, and we were able to customize it to fit the exact needs of our RV. RVmattress.com offers a 120-night sleep trial, the ability to pick different sizes and thicknesses depending on your personalized sleep needs, plus their products are toxin-free, made in the USA, and incredibly simple to set up. We were able to have ours delivered to the campground, and within hours of unboxing the mattress, it was fully expanded and ready for us to sleep on. RVmattress.com offers free shipping and is currently extending 20% off to the RV Miles community when you visit rvmattress.com/RVMiles and use the promo code RV Miles, all one word. That's rvmattress.com/RV Miles with promo code RV Miles for 20% off. Our thanks to rvmattress.com for supporting this channel and to you for supporting our sponsors. Now back to Starlink. The next big reason you might want to hold off on your Starlink purchase is the equipment itself. It isn't very mobile friendly. First off, it's AC powered, so you can't run it directly off a battery. You need an inverter if you're off grid. It uses about 40 watts of power on average, which isn't terrible, but that's going to pull about 80 amp hours per day from your batteries if you're leaving it on all day and night. If you were able to connect it to DC power, you'd save a lot of that. It's not approved for use in motion. It does work in motion, but the FCC hasn't licensed it to be used that way. So Starlink is threatening to shut people off who do use it in motion, though I haven't heard of that actually happening. But even if you want to use it in motion, mounting this thing on your roof is going to be clunky at best. The dish, the router, and the proprietary cable seem primarily designed for someone who doesn't plan to move it much. In fact, lots of people have had issues, including myself, with this proprietary connector on the dish end. For some, it works flawlessly. For others, you might have a really hard time getting it into the dish connection. I usually have to shim it with a business card and able to get it to go all the way down in this connection. Sometimes it takes me 5 or 10 minutes to actually get it to go in there. And that's really problematic for someone who wants to set it up and take it down often. It's not going back in now. Especially if you want to run the cable permanently into your RV and just disconnect the dish. For that reason, I keep my router in the pass-through storage so I can just disconnect it at the router end and hang the cord around the dish's base. But the router gets pretty hot in that pass-through storage. The first version of the dish used an Ethernet cable that you could pick up at Office Max or Best Buy or on Amazon. This cable is actually an Ethernet cable too, but the ends are proprietary. Lots of people hack into it to make their own adapter so they can use actual Ethernet cables and even to power it over DC, but that's going to be above the skill set of most users. The router itself is pretty rugged. It's rated for dust and water resistance, but it has no ports other than the one that is for the dish. So if you want to use a router that works with your other internet options, you have to buy Starlink's Ethernet adapter. But you still have to have the Starlink router in order to power the unit in line with it. The whole thing is just a little clunky for setting up if you're doing something like an overnight stopover. Starlink is certainly working on a mobile version of the antenna that will be presumably DC powered for use in motion and better suited to mount onto an RV. The current version works, but it's not very elegant for mobile life. The final big concern that RVers should think about is obstructions. Starlink likes a wide view of the northern sky. I mean, very wide. I've been able to get it to work through some smallish windows of trees by moving it out toward the edge of a campsite, but even small, low obstructions can give you regular dropouts. That's one reason I recommend people don't permanently mount it somewhere on their RV. You need to be able to move it around and get a good window to the sky. The fewer obstructions you have, the fewer dropouts. Sometimes dropouts aren't very noticeable, especially if you're using it for things like streaming video that have buffering enabled. But for video calls, you really need a fully unobstructed view. The only places I've been able to get a fully unobstructed view in the East are beachfront campgrounds, or campgrounds that have literally removed 95% of the trees, like packed RV parks in Orlando. But being that close to other RVs means you have to get the antenna up on the roof so the RVs don't block the signal. So I get out my ladder and I put it up there. Again, I don't mount it to anything because sometimes I need to put it toward the front of the RV, sometimes toward the back. I am getting the pole adapter that Starlink sells, so I can put it on top of my cell boosters pole for times when getting it really high would be helpful, but I don't expect that to be very often. Overall, Starlink has really made a difference in our mobile lives. It's great to have internet where you wouldn't have it otherwise, but it's not a perfect solution yet, and it's not going to replace your need for cellular internet for the way we travel. My next project is a load balancing failover setup that will combine our cellular plans. We carry T-Mobile and AT&T hotspots along with Verizon phones to combine them with Starlink so everything works seamlessly together. If you're willing to deal with all the nuances of getting Starlink to work for you, it can be a great addition to your mobile internet setup. I just wish they'd slow down the sales a bit to match the network congestion, and the company has a lot of growing pains to solve when it comes to customer service. It's just unacceptable to pay $135 a month for a product and not be able to get a response to an issue within a day, let alone a week or two. Starlink has been rapidly changing offerings, rules, and speeds over the last few months. And for most RVers, especially those on a limited budget, I'd recommend waiting until there's a DC-powered RV-friendly antenna available, and for the company to work through some of the growing pains of bringing a big network online. I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, click the like button. If you want more RVing videos, please click the subscribe button so you can get notified every time we put a new video out. We'll see you on the next one.